You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Hey listeners, it's September 3rd. Do you know what that means? It means we're going to start with some Tesla nonsense. So this happened a couple weeks ago. We're just getting more and more details as time goes on. Tesla had that trial down in Miami, and part of it was this crash, and Tesla said, oh, we don't have any data. We don't have any data from the car. We don't have any of this stuff. And then, quoting from an article in the Washington Post, then a self-described hacker enlisted by the plaintiffs to decode the contents of a chip they recovered from the vehicle found it while sipping a venti-sized hot chocolate at a South Florida Starbucks. Tesla later said in court that it had the data on its own servers all along. I love the slow drumbeat of Tesla just getting hoisted by its own petard.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a sexy story with the secret hacker who is still not identified. I think we saw a Twitter handle or something in the article, but the attorneys in this case were unable to crack this code for years. In this case, I think was filed 5-6 years ago,
and it was 2019.
And I don't think it was until 2024 where they basically met this hacker in a Starbucks with the some of the instrumentation from the Tesla vehicle that was involved in the crash, and within a few minutes the guy cracked it. Basically that set the stage for what happened at trial, where, the jury hears how Tesla has this data and is hiding it. And basically it takes a minor miracle in some respects to get this data out of the vehicle by the attorney for the plaintiffs and their giant team of experts who are, struggling to get this information, and then showing that Tesla had it all along. I think really gave the jury a lot to work with in making their decision on punitive damages. But it's a very interesting story. It looks like it almost didn't happen without them coming into contact with this hacker.
Yeah. So to recap, Teslas, they have a ton of sensors. They collect a ton of data. This car had a crash. It had all of that data on the local vehicle, on the vehicle that was involved. It then automatically sends it up to Tesla's servers. When Tesla's servers say, hey, we've got it, it sends back an acknowledgement to the car. And then the car, it doesn't, we thought at first that it tried to erase it, but it removes references to it locally. So it's almost like deleting a file on your computer hard drive. It's not actually gone. Just the obvious pointers to it are gone. And so again, this is just a little message for software engineers at Tesla. Don't be a dick. Come on.
Yeah.
Don't be a problem.
It's concerning too, because the hacker, says in the article that, he doesn't believe, I'm assuming it's a he. I didn't even know, since we don't really have a name, but he doesn't believe that he could do this on the newer Tesla models because they're even more protected. So it really makes you wonder, again, what's going on at Tesla? What are their employees setting? What kind of systems are they setting up here? And what type of data are they removing from your vehicle, or just whatever they're doing, destroying the link to it? I've heard it described as that, removing references to it so you can't find it. What are they doing? What kind of plan do they have for these vehicles post crash? Are they, do they have a new system now in Teslas that is even better and doesn't allow for an owner or someone suing that owner for a crash to retrieve the crash data from the vehicle? That's super problematic, and it's borderline illegal. I think we discussed this a month or so ago when we first talked about this issue, but it's way past the line of shady, and it's entering the, in this case, the judge for some reason decided not to issue sanctions against Tesla, saying that there wasn't really any proof that they could find that Tesla was purposefully hiding the data because Tesla has come up with this sob story about how, they just missed the data and this is all just like a perfect storm. Sounds a lot like what GM Cruise was saying when they ran over and pulled and hurt the pedestrian in San Francisco. They kind of described it as this perfect storm of problems that prevented us from doing the right thing. I don't buy any of that. I think it's pretty clear that Tesla's designed this system to prevent folks from retrieving crash data, and so that Tesla can continue to say that its autopilot and full self-driving systems are totally safe and continue blaming the driver into the future.
So a message to the judge in this case and to future attorneys that have to sue Tesla. There are definitely records and notes in their software development management systems. There are messages and notes in their calendar applications saying, hey, we're going to have a meeting to discuss specific features on this thing. And this thing being, let's hide the data from plaintiffs' attorneys, from the people who bought the cars, from law enforcement. This was not a one-off thing. This was not a perfect storm. This was planned. And they had meetings for this, I guarantee you, over months. And they released software and they did testing on this. This was planned. And with all software, it's not just, oh, it was a rogue employee like Volkswagen tried with their whole Dieselgate thing. No.
They tried that?
They did try that at first. This is
GM kind of tried that with the ignition switches for a minute, but it didn't go very far.
No. So I would like future jurists, don't buy this perfect storm nonsense. This is engineered in. There are absolutely meeting notes on this, which if Tesla's attorneys are listening right now, they're saying, delete the notes right now. Delete all records. Commit logs that have notes about this. Fred, as our chief engineer, would you agree with such a statement?
Which part of that, Anthony? You've covered a lot of ground there.
Well, that Tesla definitely had meetings about this. This is how this software will function. They have notes internally about all of this.
All of that nonsense about elite, what do they call it? Lean. I'm thinking of the right word, but the agile programming, all that. Right. I mean, all of the background of agile programming is consistently open communications, intensive communications, making sure that all the interfaces are correct and that all the software works together in small little bites. And the only way that can work is if you have an overall hierarchy that is completely transparent to the people involved in the process to make sure that all these little bits of software work together to achieve a competent global end. It's like, trying to put together a brick wall. Unless all the bricks are working, you're not going to end up with a good wall. And what they've done here is put it in the process for a very solid digital wall that nobody can penetrate except for those few people who've got the keys to the kingdom. And those are basically resolved by the people who are chief engineers. It's a lot like compartmented secret organizations where nobody has an overall view of what's happening except for the people at the very top of the pyramid. So yes, extensive planning. It didn't happen by accident. And basically it's your basic evil empire.
Right.
Yeah. I guess there's a point brought up in the article too that kind of, we talk about this case as a positive thing, and it is, but the fact is, I believe that it's going to take a lot more of this type of thing to happen to actually get Tesla to change. Tesla operates in a pretty arrogant manner, I guess you could say, and I'm not convinced. We talked last week about how a $27,000 per day fine that NHTSA could assess Tesla for failing to appropriately report its crashes is not a deterrent. And, there's a question, given Tesla's market cap, whether a $200 million product liability verdict is enough to get Tesla to change its practices. do we need more of these cases to come about? And the hacker himself has pointed out a problem with future cases. Tesla's already strengthened whatever backdoors allowed them to access the data in this case. They can't access this crash data anymore. They can't see into the system like they did. Is that going to make, additional verdicts or finding additional wrongdoing on Tesla's part even possible?
Well, the judge didn't seem to like the fact that overt lies were coming from Tesla about the composition and availability of data related to the crash. So, 200 and some odd $million, it's got to be a determinant. I don't care what the market cap is. Somebody notices that kind of check being written. And yeah, it's still tied up in appeals. And I still think it's certain it's going to end up being a lot of money. I don't think Tesla can ignore that, because if they look at their sales, the trajectory is headed downhill. You look at the margin available per vehicle, also headed downhill.
Yeah. I mean, I think Elon this week even said that Tesla's future is 80% robotics.
Yeah.
Which is,
and there was an article in the New York Times recently that talked about the economics in China, and basically they've got 200 some odd companies putting out self-driving vehicles and electric vehicles. Their market can support maybe 5 or 6, and all of the companies are assuming tremendous amounts of debt, financed by the government and financed by their suppliers. Looks like a Ponzi scheme, but something's going to collapse here real soon, and Tesla's going to find itself, I think, on the losing end of that vast debt collapse, because they're going to try to sell their cars for 59 cents a piece just to get rid of inventory, or they're going to plow them under the ground. That's what Tesla's competing against, and the least they can do is provide some kind of decent honesty about the capabilities of the car and your likelihood of being killed by the car if you're going to lay out your own money for one of these vehicles.
Michael, the question I have, and we've discussed this in the past, is, so let's pretend I'm a middle-aged white man who feels the system's turned against me, and
you're pretending?
Yeah, I'm pretending this, but I'm pretending the system's aligned against me. And I'm like, I'm getting repressed, and everything's bad. It's so hard being middle-aged white man in America. So I want to feel better about myself, and I go out and I buy a Tesla. Now, in this case, did I actually buy the vehicle? Because if Tesla's recording all of this data in a car that I just paid money for, but then they're taking that data and sending it off to their mothership, who owns the data? Did I just give a bunch of money to be surveilled?
I mean, I think technically you should own the data. However, how are you going to access that data?
How do I even know what data they have?
How do you know what data is even there? What's being collected? I mean, technically, you might even have a good legal argument to say you own the data. However, accessing that data and just like, most of us own our vehicles, but 99.9% of us don't have the scanner required to download the information from the black box on our vehicles. I don't think that's anything new, but we know what's on that black box. That's federally outlined. I mean, we know exactly what's going to be there. As far as what data elements are collected about our driving or about the incident or the crash that we were involved in. With Tesla, you have no idea. In fact, I think it was a few years ago when I first saw the spreadsheet of all the information Tesla's collecting, literally like 1,000 different data points every millisecond. So a million data points are being collected, every second? Which is pretty crazy. Just how many and how much data is being collected by those vehicles that you're just completely unaware of. And also, you don't, when you don't know what they're collecting, you have no idea if they're, collecting. We saw some stories around Tesla employees looking at people, in compromised situations in their car, having sex, doing other things. The employees had access to those videos through the uploads to the company. So when you buy one of these vehicles, and I would, venture to say that Tesla is not the only bad actor in this area. I'm sure there are other vehicle manufacturers collecting, video or other data from your car that you're not aware of. And you almost either have to say, I'm not going to buy a connected vehicle, or just go ahead and offer yourself up to your potential loss of privacy. And there's not a good solution there because the law is way behind here in terms of dictating who owns what data, who should have access to it. There's there are kind of a mishmash of some state protections, very limited federal protections for privacy. We saw what happened to the folks who own GM vehicles who had their driving habits reported directly to LexisNexis so that insurance companies could download them and determine their insurance rates based on that information. So I think there needs to be, first, there have to be proper disclosures to people who are buying any type of consumer technology that, where it's not obvious what the functions are, what kind of information it's being collected. You need to have some serious disclosure of what's going to be collected at the time of purchase or sale. And even then, there's a question as to whether, your average consumer is going to be able to digest and understand all that information. And not only that, it's the world of surveillance goes well beyond that. If you want to talk about flock cameras and things the government is doing to surveil you, it gets even more interesting.
That's a different podcast we have.
Yes, it is.
All right. So we'll get back to Tesla in the future. But in the meantime, you can go to autosafety.org and click on donate. Oh, you did already? Can you do it again? Thank you. Let's continue. We have another article in the Washington Post, and
yes, speaking of flock cameras,
no, this is about the coolest thing that people like to watch in movies: car chases. I'm going to quote from the article: "The pursuits, all of which began as traffic stops for nonviolent crimes, and were initiated by federal task forces formed in response to Trump's August 11th." executive order. That was the one who's like, hey, I love my daughter and I like cheeseburgers and I hate America. Would have violated DC police policy. The district's police department allows car chases only when the driver is putting other lives in danger or is suspected of committing a violent crime. Park police had imposed stricter rules allowing pursuit only for people wanted for violent felonies after two officers chased, then shot and killed unarmed motorist Jean Gasser in Northern Virginia in 2017. But last week, Park Police announced those chase restrictions were gone. That's right. If you're Park Police, you're no longer on horseback. You're on full horsepower. That's right. Go nuts, tear it up, chase down those people who failed to stop at a stop sign.
Yeah. There have been, so far at the time this article was written, there were 10 pursuits that had been initiated since August 14th, at least that the Post was able to uncover, 6 of which ended in a crash. Luckily, no one was killed. There was a really high-speed collision on I-295. I think it was, 80 plus miles per hour that hit some other vehicles, highlighting the fact that it's not just criminals who are at risk here. And that's really ultimately our concern. I mean, I want criminals to be caught as much as anyone. I don't like bad guys. However, if you look at the why I mentioned flock, if you look at the underlying offenses involved in almost all these collisions, most of them were the police were detecting a problem with the tag. It was false tags, expired tags, lack of a tag, and then starting to pull these people over, and these people fled. Now, there was not a single one of these chases that involved, someone who was actively trying to hurt other human beings. There was not an active public safety threat involved. These were all some very minor traffic issues. Some of them, are indicative of a stolen car. But at that point, you're talking about, a property crime. And by initiating a pursuit, you're turning what is a simple property crime into a potential public safety threat of the police chase going through a metropolitan area. So there's a lot of problems here. I mean, another problem here is if you look at the maps of where all these incidents occurred, they're all in the poorest parts of the city. Raises questions about what the hell the federal government is doing patrolling those areas and trying to enforce license plate violations, which are clearly a Washington, D.C. issue, not a federal issue. There's just a lot of problems here. And, many of these problems are, I think stem from the fact that the leadership of the Interior Department is kind of clueless on the issue, and this is, I'm going to go right into my gaslight of the week here.
Go for it.
Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, former chimney sweep, in Trump's cabinet meeting last week, thanked the president for giving a green light to park police vehicle pursuits. Here's what he said. The next night, they had so much fun. They pulled people over. They started to take off. They chased them. They stopped them. Now, that is just, I don't know. It almost sounded like Trump talking when he was saying they had so much fun. That's really not what, making park police have fun at night is not their duty. They're supposed to monitor the federal spaces in Washington and make sure those are safe. I don't see how they're doing this. I laughed at one that said, they pulled over a vehicle because of the odor of burned marijuana. I've probably joked in this podcast a number of times that, the entire city of DC smells like burning marijuana if you're driving around the roads. It's virtually everywhere. I don't understand why the park police are involved in that. This is the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, who is basically, he was the governor of North Dakota. He should have some experience in directing appropriate law enforcement responses to situations. And this simply isn't one. And the callous way in which he, talks about police having fun, doing a job that could put innocent people in danger over what are essentially minor crimes it's just kind of this gleeful, weird, I don't know how to describe it. It's a disconnect between, the reality of safety on our streets and our politicians. And that guy gets my gaslight of the week.
That's pretty
Government
good.
by Rambocracy.
Yeah. Fred, you ready for your gaslight? Now, before you start, I want you to remember, passion gets a lot of points.
Action gets a lot of points.
Passion.
All right.
Passion.
All right. And what is the fruit of it? Never mind.
Continue.
Passion fruit.
Yeah.
Humor again. Sorry.
You've already lost before you even started.
That makes it hard. Okay, so I read for the first time a document by AVIA, which is the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, that has richly earned the gaslight for this week. What level shall we address? First of all, why do they claim to represent the industry? Because AVIA membership doesn't include Tesla, which is the largest supplier of self-driving vehicles, does not include Mercedes, which currently has the only state-certified Level 3 operational vehicles, nor does it include any Chinese companies, which are producing huge numbers of AVs. So why is AVIA claiming to be representative of the industry? It's not clear at all. But anyway, they put out a document named Securing American Leadership in Autonomous Vehicles 2025. It's kind of fun to read. And there's some subtle points in there that are interesting. So first of all, in the section called AV Safety, Transparency, and Accountability, they include the need for collecting data, include relevant, safety relevant data. They don't say what that is, which would be useful, but still, that's some progress. They say it should be put in a repository, quoting, all information shared in a repository must be subject to strict confidential business information protections, which both federal and state regulators must uphold. They also say that only state and federal regulators should get that data. So people like us, who are third-party advocates for safety, will be excluded from the data. So will academics. So that's their vision of where things should go. They talk about enhancing public understanding of incident reporting by removing the current one-day reporting deadline. So their idea of enhancing transparency is to remove transparency by removing a reporting deadline requirement. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. National AV Safety data repository, again, including safety relevant data. But what the hell is that? Our ideas of what that includes is probably a lot different than what the industry thinks ought to be included in the public disclosures. They say that the data should be available to relevant state transportation regulatory agencies and under strict confidential business information protections. Well, that's pretty much where we are now, except that other people like us can see some of the data. But the industry is using blanket confidentiality exclusions to make sure that nobody can see anything useful. And this they want to be federal policy. To support innovation, they recommend that NHTSA clarify whether by interpretation or regulatory changes that requirements for manually operated driving controls and certain indicators and telltales are not applicable to level 4. Well, level 4 by definition includes vehicles that can default to human control. So how does that make sense without having the requested absence of driver controls that are accessible to humans? It makes no sense. They want to have a rulemaking informed by industry only to demonstrate a basic level of ADS driving proficiency. Now, the idea of demonstrating driving proficiency for an ADS makes a lot of sense, but to have that restricted to the members of the AVIA or some other industry organization excludes things like getting in and out of the car safely, a lot of things that we can find in our own list of requirements, the AV Bill of Rights that we have posted on our website, that are not included in any of the industry's vision of what should be available by disclosure. Basically, they want to leave consumer advocates and academics completely out in the cold. They do talk about some tests that would be good, but they talk about a need to devolve to a minimum risk condition without really talking about what it is. And they refer to the J3016, the SAE J3016 minimal risk condition, but nobody's ever demonstrated that that is a safe operating condition or a safe destination for a fallback. That's just a sampling. It goes on and on and on, but I am giving them my gaslight nomination. A lot of flowery language, but a lot of dangerous precepts that are designed to confuse the public and give industry a free rein to run rampant on the highways. All
right. I'm going to do mine now. I'm going to do some quotes from an article from Inside EVs, and you guys are going to guess which part of what I'm saying to you is my gaslight. This is a good one. Ready? So, according to this article, Model Y is equipped with cameras and artificial intelligence, promise to deliver a more generalized solution to autonomy. Musk told investors in July that robotaxis will be available to half the U.S. population by the end of this year. And then Musk said on his social media platform X earlier month that the service will transition to open access in September, meaning the broader public should be able to download the robotaxi app and order a ride. So out of those three things, which is my gaslight?
Is there like a D, all of the above here?
Ooh, there could be, but I'm actually not being that. I'm not
because
being that
they're
clever.
all. I mean, all three are. The first one technically, I guess depending on what you think about what that statement could be true. The second two are just not going to happen, right?
Yeah. Brett, do you have any thoughts on those three?
It's hard to pick among them.
Okay.
But I do think it's great because my daughter is an attorney, and this is going to generate a hell of a lot of business for attorneys.
Hey, speaking of attorneys who've generated a hell of a lot of business, you want to share that largesse? Go to autosafety.org, click on donate. Anyway, so out of these three, the obvious ones are Musk talking about how this is available to the public right away and all this stuff. Well, we've covered that 100 times. Now, my gaslight is the statement from Inside EVs, Model Y is equipped with cameras and artificial intelligence. The gaslight being, what the hell does artificial intelligence mean?
Mm-hmm.
No one knows, and they're just putting it out there. And Tesla keeps falling back on, we have artificial intelligence. They have this supercomputer dojo or something like that. Well, you know what they did last week? fire the entire dojo team. That's right. They have nothing. They do not have any artificial intelligence. As best as anyone can tell, is they're using some open source object detection software that any kid could have downloaded in like 2005. Maybe they've made adjustments to it. We don't know because they're opaque. That's my gaslight. And I give myself the win because I gave you guys an option to weigh in. That's why. And I haven't won in a while, and that's what I feel like. Michael's definitely second because
the pity win.
Yeah, but God damn it, Michael! I was
Is
going to
that
make
really
you
a win?
You know, you were going to be second because you used a guy named Doug. I mean, that's like by default a winner, but no, Fred's second now because you're not being nice to me.
I take pride in being last, given the quality of the judging going on here.
We got to address the systemic problem we've got here.
Moving on.
Let's turn it over to AI.
Let's stop this.
Nothing to see here, you think, Anthony?
Nothing to see here. Let's go to a different story titled "Man Escapes Car Fire While Driving, Warns Other About Potentially Deadly Risk with Recalls." I'm going to quote from here. It was actually Mother's Day. Daniel McAdams told Channel 11, "I was going to get flowers for my wife. I started smelling this strange smell. I said, something doesn't smell right. So I started coming back home. First of all, don't buy flowers for your wife on Mother's Day. Come on, plan ahead." Continuing, McAdams says he crested the hill to his driveway. His car started to fill with smoke. It was like really thick fog, McAdams said. You could barely see. I could barely see out the windshield. It was heavy. McAdams said he got out as fast as he could and grabbed his garden hose. I popped the hood, saw the flames coming from back behind the engine, and that's when it started dousing it. This is horrific. And it goes on to deal with his problems with the insurance companies, but this was a Kia. I don't know if we know the exact model, he said in here. But
I forget what it was.
It doesn't say in the article, but they do quote a man named Michael Brooks in the article.
Yeah, I got the VIN number from them and looked up the recalls, and he had the fire recalls in the Kia. Actually, both of them, not only the one that was due to the engine failure fires that was a really big problem, but also the HECU and the brake control system that catches on fire as well. This one looks like the engine issue, but neither one of them was fixed. So, and especially that Kia and Hyundai problem with the engines. If you haven't gotten that fixed, there were thousands of fires caused by that. I think in their reporting to NHTSA at one point, I want to say there were between Kia and Hyundai, and this was 5 years ago, there were at least 4,000 or 5,000 fires across the United States that were identified in these cars due to that engine problem. And so it is a very a lot of times we'll see a fire issue that's very rare. It might happen to 1 in a million vehicles. This was happening at rates far higher than that. And rates that were, leading the auto industry at the time. I think IHS did a study on that after we filed our petition and said, there's some problems with these Kia and Hyundais and fires. But the ultimately here, this has been a recall that's been available, and it's not a great recall. It doesn't really fix the problem. It's a knock sensor detection software program that's installed that basically, when your engine starts to detect that it is going to have this problem that could ultimately cause a fire, your vehicle is going to be shut down into limp mode where you can't really drive it. You can barely drive at all. It's going to be incredibly slow. Your only option is to go to the dealer at that point. But the guy in this article, unfortunately, I don't know if he bought the car used or, just never got his notices. He doesn't appear to have been aware of the recalls at all. But it is a good reason to get your recalls. Recall would have been free, and now he's out of a lot of money. Probably is not going to get a whole lot out of Kia. Hopefully his insurance will help him cover it, but it's important to get your recalls.
So in this case, Fred, the guy's car's on fire, and he takes a garden hose to douse it. In my mind, I think oil and that's not how you want to put out that fire, or is that okay in this case?
Well, firefighters would use water too initially.
Okay.
So you got 3 things that contribute to the fire, right? You got fuel, you've got heat, and then you got oxygen. unless your battery's on fire, in which case you've got a different problem. But in this case, the wad would remove the heat pretty much. And so it worked for him. It put the fire out. So I think that if you can, you try to douse it with whatever's available. And if you cannot, you just get yourself to safety and watch it burn.
Well, I'm glad this guy's safe. That's awful that he had to go through this loss, though. Moving on, here's a loss that you can prevent, though, about rental cars. And we've talked about this before. And this is about basically you can rent a car and there's no regulations if the car rental companies are checking them for recalls or really even maintaining them well.
Now, there is a regulation in the law on recalls. Now, rental car companies cannot rent out a vehicle that has an open recall on it.
Don't listen to me, folks.
Yeah, don't listen to Anthony. But there are a lot of other concerns here. And I will say, this article is about rental companies cutting corners on safety checks. And I will say, not in defense of rental companies, they a lot of the problems you see in this article cited to rental companies are also things that a lot of us who own vehicles don't do as well, right? Like driving on bald tires, not conducting recalls like our last story was about. Having faulty equipment and lack of maintenance is something we see on vehicles all over the road everywhere. But when you're renting a vehicle from a rental car company, you should expect that vehicle to be maintained better than your average human, right? And the article goes through kind of some stories of consumers who had gone through problems, had to jump through hoops because the rental vehicles they kept getting had problems. And that's something, everyone should do. When you get a rental car, I would not advise you to hop in it and take off. First of all, if it is a Tesla or another vehicle with electronic door latches, I would advise you to read the owner's manual and make sure you know where the manual releases are. But beyond that, there's just you have to inspect it visually. I think I saw another article this week where rental companies now have AI that's looking at the vehicle for dents and dings when you bring it back, and it's resulting in people getting a lot of bills for things they don't even believe they caused. You can check for recalls. The odds are you will not find a rental vehicle with an open recall. However, there have been some violations of that provision. But most rental companies since for at least the last decade have been subject to a federal law that requires them to get the repairs done. Also, you should talk to the rental company about their maintenance and the safety checks that they're performing on these vehicles. It's a lot of people shop around for rental vehicles, and it's hard to familiarize themselves with the policies for every one of them. But there are companies that do more than others, and they might be worth a couple extra bucks a day in the long term. So, that's really the advice. Also, the advice in the article is, speak up immediately. If you have a problem with a vehicle, don't feel like there's nothing you can do about it. The rental, the employees at the rental car company are probably going to be happy to get you into another car if you have problems with the one you're in.
Yeah, but let's be clear. No human being has ever done a complete safety check of a rental car before they took it away from the lot. That just doesn't happen. And so it's really incumbent on the rental companies to do it and to obey the law. So whatever mechanism is necessary to get them to obey the law and do the safety checks to protect the consumers is really where the focus ought to be. I think it's unreasonable to say that, you as a consumer are going to do a safety check. You're going to take the VIN number. You're going to check with the NHTSA. That's just not going to happen. But do check the tires, folks, and make sure that you get good tires. That's easy enough to do.
Yeah, I rented 2 cars, I think it was last year. And the first one, I'm waiting online for an hour to get the car. And by the time I get the car, I don't want to be like, I have to go back. And the first car they gave me was a Jeep. And I was like, but it was brand new. Because if not, I'd be like, it says Jeep on it, which just says return. But it was brand new. And I could check the tires because, I'm on the show and you guys have taught me. And the next time, like a week or two later, it was a different car. It's still waiting online forever, waiting for them to bring the car out. And it said Kia. And I was like, also. but it was a really fun car to drive. But I did check
Yep.
the tires. I did check all of the, but I admit I didn't check for recalls because also I didn't want to have to be explained to my wife, no, we just waited for an hour. We're going to hang out for another hour.
Yeah. And that's a lot of the issue with rentals. It's like the time pressure. You're at an airport, you're ready to get to wherever you're going. You don't have time to do a full check of the vehicle, even if you have the capability of doing that. And a lot of folks out there do. I'm certainly, I certainly am not some super expert on maintenance that can look under the hood and tell you that there's a problem. I don't think most of us are. And so it's incumbent upon us to trust the rental agency and their processes of checks and safety checks are very important to ensure that you're going to get a safe vehicle.
I think it would be easy enough to put a what are those square things called? The
Windows.
codes you can read with your phone.
Oh, QR codes.
QR code. I think it would be easy enough to put a QR code on these vehicles and then link it to the company's database as to what kind of service they've provided. It seems like a very straightforward and simple programming task, Anthony. That shouldn't be a big burden on anybody.
No, I love this idea.
You could do the same thing with the vehicle check at NHTSA. There's no reason why human beings have to plug in all those numbers. You could just use the QR code and zip it right through. Why would that be a problem?
This is a great idea. It almost makes me want to abandon our autonomous vehicle company that we're building in Florida. Like, that's how good of an idea this is. One thing
does that get me a higher ranking back on my gaslight, or am I still stuck with being a perennial loser?
No, you're second place again this week because again, Michael's got some attitude issues. One thing this article points out is saying is, hey, look for, if it has any of those little stickers that most of us have on our cars, like last time inspected. That's always a good one just to quickly check and be like, oh, last time inspected was, during the Bush years, and then probably ask for a different car. But hey, speaking of Fred and everything about you, Fred, let's talk. What's that segment called? Oh, the Tao of Fred. Let's talk about that.
Well, we have a guest appearance this week by a guy named Mr. Simino.
Hey, that's me. All right.
And so for some local content, folks, there was an article in a newspaper that I actually have never purchased and I've only rarely looked at, which is called the Daily News, if I remember right, Anthony.
No, it's the New York Post. It is the favorite newspaper of fishmongers.
Post, okay. And so what was that article about, Anthony?
That article is
small
about
town.
Yeah, this small town called New York City, and Waymo saying, "Hey, we want to put our robo-taxis in New York." The article is titled "Buses, Bikes, Jaywalkers, and Aggressive Drivers. Can Waymo really make it in New York City?" The answer is no. But that's just my opinion. But anyway, you may have a different opinion.
Well, my opinion is that every vehicle that is being presented as a self-driving vehicle should first not be allowed on the streets until the company has revealed what their safety standards are, what their safety requirements are, and the method they've used to establish that they do conform to their safety requirements, which have incidentally been endorsed by the local authority responsible for traffic regulation. That should be the bare minimum. But instead, the Waymo approach is to just put the cars out there and try to enforce their standard that we haven't killed anybody lately. That seems to be the only thing that they really want to have out in the public domain. New York presents a lot of basic difficulties with traffic. For example, how do you navigate the New Year's Eve celebration that fills up about, 130 different blocks of New York with drunken people? There's no other environment in the United States like New York City. Even the people who live there have to dodge vehicles, have to dodge other pedestrians, have to dodge motorized bicycles on the sidewalk. This is really a chaotic environment.
Yeah, you regularly have to break traffic laws in order to drive.
Yeah.
There's just no way around it.
Anthony, as the resident of New York City, are you happy with the fact that you don't even know what the hell they're trying to achieve and they're just throwing drivers against the wall to see if their vehicles are acceptable from a public relations perspective without any bearing to their technical compliance with unknown standards.
No. And the interesting thing is about 8 years ago, I want to say, Waymo had test vehicles running around the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which basically you can think of this as like a giant mall parking lot type thing with a lot more obstructions. And they had them running out there. And I don't know if they were actually learning anything, because what are you going to learn by driving in a parking lot for years on end? Or is it just some PR thing? But uh, no, I don't. I think trying to get Waymos to work in New York City or any other AV company is going to be very hard, because these things are programmed to follow traffic laws, right? And in order, like I said, to navigate New York at times, you have to actively break traffic laws. You have to contend with jaywalkers as you're trying to turn. And so by the time you actually get to make your turn or progress, the light has changed to red. But you've gone out far enough that everybody else knows that you're going to go ahead. Whereas a Waymo, I imagine, or an AV couldn't be programmed to violate the law like that.
Well, let me ask a related question, Anthony. One of the things that Waymo touts is the fact that they are environmentally sensitive, that they're much better than the alternative vehicles. So could you please explain to me, if you can, how introducing thousands of new vehicles to the New York City streets and removing the revenue that would otherwise go to public transportation by putting these thousands of new vehicles on the street, each of which is extremely energy intensive, using rare materials in huge amounts, how that's environmentally sensitive? Because I'm a little confused by that.
I don't know, since New York City gets a lot of its power from natural gas. So
So a little bit of a problem. Okay, I'll accept that.
What about? I mean, the thing that I think about most in this whole Waymo in New York thing is the obvious. Like, we've talked a lot about how driverless vehicles. I mean, humans have a hard time interpreting the potential actions of other humans. We talked a lot about how with driverless cars, there's a big gap in the terms of the car's ability to understand human movements, human behaviors, which are often unpredictable. And New York City is kind of the heart of that in America. More humans, a lot of unpredictability. And that's where I really think there's going to be a hard time for these vehicles, just the crush of humanity that they encounter in the city.
I once drove on Broadway from end to end just because I could. And what was interesting is, as I was driving through the upper reaches of Manhattan, I found that the whole idea of painted lanes was something that was just a notion that was, interesting, but not necessarily directive to the local residents. The moment somebody had room to squeeze a car through, regardless of where the lines might have been painted, here they come. So I don't know, like you said, Michael, how conformist to traffic laws in any way can allow Waymos to operate in New York City. That just isn't going to happen.
Perfect example. The other day, I'm going down the street, and the traffic lane that I'm in, traffic stopped moving. Couldn't figure out why, because a whole bunch of city buses stopped in the traffic lane 4 in a row. So what everyone had to do, and we all knew, was you had to cross over into the opposing lane of traffic, go around these 4 city buses, and then come back into the correct lane of traffic. I think it might be easier for Waymo to try, navigating the streets of Rome first than the insanity of New York. And Fred has been muted, but he's very attractive, so we allow it.
We used to have a saying in one factory I worked at that we lose money on everything we sell, but we make it up on volume. And I suspect Waymo is doing that. They'll be dumping thousands of vehicles into this capital abyss of their operations in New York before they finally back off. So I still think that this is basically just an AV bubble. They're trying to put a PR wrap on it. to make people think that it's necessary and desirable. But if they can make it in New York, they should be able to make it anywhere. I don't think they'll make it there, but it's going to be tragic to watch it evolve.
Yeah. This New York Post article, I think, sums it up perfectly with the last line is that quoting from somebody saying, "You don't have to make small talk with a driver." That's what this comes down to. These are sociopaths. I was in a cab last night, and the small talk I had to make with the driver was explaining to him where I lived. That's it. And then I was like, just take this exit. I'll guide you from there. It's not that hard. I don't get it. But I also see the other downside is the New York City taxi drivers are, it's commonly an entry first job for recent immigrants. My dentist, when he was going through dental school, he's a guy who immigrated from Russia. He's like, yeah, I drove a taxi for a few years. He's like, because that's the job I could get. And that's a very common New York story. But now the robots will take it. Next thing you know, I'm going to the robot dentist. And I won't have to make small talk with that thing.
I read this week that they've crunched the data on how much employees of rideshare and taxis are earning, and in the places where autonomous vehicles have started picking up passengers, I think it was probably Phoenix, San Francisco, Austin, maybe a couple others. They've seen the hourly rates for cab and rideshare drivers go down. So it's already having an impact on what you can make as a driver in those cities where at least where the technology has been deployed and is operating and taking passengers.
All right, I got to go into a less than happy story. This one is from Consumer Affairs, titled "Hot Car Children's Deaths Continue While Washington Does Nothing." And we've talked about this with our friends from Kids and Car Safety. And unfortunately, quoting from this article, authorities confirmed that a 4-month-old infant died on August 25th after being left inside a vehicle in South Carolina. The case marks at least the 24th child hot car death this year in the United States, continuing a tragic pattern that has claimed more than 1,150 young lives since 1990.
And since that article was written last week, there have been 3 more. So this is the worst time of the year. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before, but, I get an email from Kids and Car Safety every time there's a child that's found dead in a vehicle after being left there. And it's horrible. I mean, we know we have the technology available. There are only a couple of manufacturers that are actually putting good tech into cars to prevent this. I believe Volvo and Hyundai in some of their very luxury models have technology that can detect children in the rear seat. The industry is pushing kind of this door sequencing technology that doesn't detect a child, but simply, basically tells you if you opened a door, closed it, and then didn't reopen the door after you reach your destination. Just to simplify it, it's a little more complex than that, but it's not the solution here. And this continues to happen. NHTSA was supposed to require manufacturers to put detection systems in their vehicles. The industry has continually pushed back on that. And in the current Washington, the industry is going to get what they want. And it's sad, but it's probably, we probably won't see a rule here until 2030.
Yeah, I was explaining this to friends of mine who have a newborn, and I said, hey, this is a problem. And I brought this up because I'm a lot of fun at parties and explaining this. And they had the normal reaction that everybody does. What horrible parents would do this? How bad? And then explaining these people are no different than any of us are, that, the story we were told where like, oh, I drove to daycare, dropped the kid off, but it just didn't happen. It's this cognitive dissonance, and they're not
most of the time. Or a lot of the time it is. Sometimes it is bad parenting. Sometimes it is people going into the Walmart and leaving their kids in the car thinking they're going to be fine. But a lot of times it is literally people who do not believe their child was in the car. They just cognitively thought they had dropped them off and just did not realize. And there's a good, for everyone who questions or has, negative feelings towards all the events, I would always encourage you to go back and read an article by Gene Weingarten in the Washington Post from probably 20 years ago now, that looked into the stories of people who had been involved in these types of events. And, there are stories that clearly outline the need for technology that can intervene here, because the technology to detect children could alert nearby good Samaritans or police to the presence of children in cars in all cases, whether a child was left in the car purposefully or on accident. It doesn't matter. It's the technology is directed towards saving the child, no matter how it happened. And blaming the parents does not help. Doesn't really help push this forward, because it's kind of like you're blaming. I mean, this is something that's going to happen whether or not there's a bad parent involved. There's just a problem in the human brain, and this isn't the only type of circumstance in which it arises, but people just cannot always 100% of the time track exactly where their children are. People forget things, and the technology really is the solution.
Yeah, if you've ever had white line fever where you take a drive and you come home and you're like, I don't remember how I drove this, then you're susceptible to that. Like, that's happened. I think everybody who's driven a car. But anyway, let's go to a somewhat, well, not really a lighter topic, but a little lighter. We'll do this one before we jump into recalls. This is an article we wanted to get to last week and couldn't. This is from Yahoo, titled "Driver Raises Concern After Spotting Dangerous Trend on Roads That Cannot Be Legal." And this is bizarre. Someone's going down the road and the back of a panel truck is an LCD screen or some sort of screen playing advertisements, like full motion video. You're driving down the street. It's illegal for you to look at your phone. We've discussed this with the sheriff that was on the show, that the most dangerous people on the road are distracted drivers. And now this is a vehicle actively playing television commercials at you. Michael, is this legal?
It would be a state level legality. There wouldn't be any federal ban on this. I think it's a horrible idea to put moving motion pictures or anything that would distract people on the side of big trucks. I thought it was so absurd that it might be an AI generated video just to kind of generate outrage and clicks for somebody online. But there are rolling digital billboard trucks. They appear to be in use. I'm not sure if you can use them in every state, but there's a company called Rolling Box Media, just to name one, that advertises, Dunkin' Donuts on their website is their main thing, and I can't tell, if there's probably a difference here. We see a lot of city buses that are roaming around that have static advertisements on them,
right,
things that don't change, which, could still be somewhat distracting. I think we all get distracted by anything in our field of view on a long, boring drive, but movement and video, essentially a TV riding down the road, I think most everyone is going to agree is something that's not safe and something that we should look to get rid of. And I'm sure there are some lobbyists working for these companies selling these that are not excited about that proposition. But come on, guys, it's a pretty clear distraction and a safety issue.
Crazy. All right, let's jump into the recalls. Ready? Yes. All right, first one up, Chrysler. 219,577 vehicles, the 2029 to 2021 Ram ProMaster, the 2019 to 2020 Dodge Journey. These are two vehicles that I've never heard of. The rear visibility system, is this rear view? Oh, God damn it. Really? Really, Michael? A rear view image that is blank blue, black, or inverted reduces the driver's view of what is behind the vehicle. This is the rear view camera again?
Yeah, it is.
God.
This was, this is one of the less common causes here. Usually we're encountering software issues, cable problems, interference with the infotainment system. This one's water intrusion into the camera. So essentially,
they didn't seal it proper.
Looks like, yeah. Well, is this one water intrusion? Maybe that's another recall for today. Anyway, this one may not be water intrusion, but either way, these cameras are the bad thing here, not the software. So essentially, folks are going to get a new rear view camera for these vehicles. And this one's been going a while. Like these are 2019, 2020, 2021 vehicles. So they've been having problems for a few years now. Have just now decided to do a recall. Owners are probably going to get notified sometime around the first week of October. And then, it's hard to say if the new camera is going to be available right then or at a later date. So we're not really clear on when you'll be able to get the repair at this point.
Up next, world leading champion Ford Motor Company, 105,441 vehicles, the 2024 to 2025 Ford Mustang. Please don't. Oh, no, this is intermittent operation of signal lamps may make the vehicle less visible to other drivers.
This is the water intrusion one.
But this is not a rear view camera.
No, this is rear light lamps. See, I had a little brain fart there.
It's okay.
Water intrusion basically gets into your the BCM. What's the BCM, you ask? I'm going to say that is the body control module. I'm not sure exactly where that is, if that's in the rear where they're having these problems with the lamps. Maybe it is. But the solution here is you're going to have to bring your vehicle in, and Ford is going to do their best to seal the vehicle to make sure that no more water comes in. It looks like they're going to be, doing some work on your side panel cowls and your cowl top inner. That's not cowl, that's cowl with an L. And your cowl top to try to seal the water to prevent it from getting into your
BCM.
Body control module. Yeah.
And it is the body control module. The internet told me so.
When this one's got a weird, it looks, I don't know, this is a weird remedy that doesn't look like it's going to come out until between January 1st and March 31st of next year. So owners are going to be waiting for this one for a long time. God, you would think there would be something you could do in the meantime with your body control module, like wrap it in saran wrap or something to protect it from water. But we're not advising that because we have no idea if you can even do that. But it might be worth looking into if you have a dealer that you're good buddies with.
Hey, Jim Farley, can we wrap our body control module in saran wrap, or is spandex a better choice? Come on the show. Discuss. Our last recall is from another company I've never heard of called Ford Motor Company. Oh my God, what are these guys? 100,900 vehicles, the 2024 to 2026 Ford Ranger. Side curtain airbags that may not meet the displacement requirements of FMVS 226 S4.2.1.
Yeah, and the reason they might not meet those displacement requirements is because for some reason, when they're deploying, these airbags are catching on the B-pillar. They call it the B-pillar inner reinforcement flange that tears them and prevents them from building up any pressure because they're losing all their pressure from the gases generated by the inflator module. And so essentially your airbag starts to deploy, tears, and you don't get any inflation in the airbag and therefore no protection. So they are, look, I don't know, this one's going to be another one where owners are waiting a few months. It looks like they're not going to be getting an owner notification till the end of the year at best. So Ford is making some folks wait on recall repairs this week.
Well, they've got how many of them open at this point this year? 1 million?
109, I think it was the last check.
But that's covering about 1 million vehicles? Because it seems all of them are like 100,000.
There are, I'm sure it covers more than 1 million vehicles with that many recalls, but there were a lot of smaller ones. Remember I don't know if we covered it last week. There was a guy who there was like one owner who had a recall, twice had his vehicle recalled, which is interesting.
And maybe Jim Farley will come to his house and fix it for him. Absolutely. If not, he can come on this show anytime he wants. And
Anthony's love continues.
I do want to point out that Ford is doing its best to let people know about these deficiencies in their safety systems versus Tesla, which is doing its very best to make sure people never find out about the deficiencies in its safety systems after any critical event. So
yeah, and that's the point I like to make when asked about it. Is Ford may just be doing a better job on safety than anyone else, even though it looks like, and there probably is a very good argument that a lot of this is due to poor quality and a lack of safety focus in the past. But the fact that after NHTSA has brought this to their attention, fined them a few $1 million and put some restrictions on them, they are really recalling things at a faster pace than we've ever seen in history from any car manufacturer, which suggests that it could be a good thing, right?
Yeah, it may ultimately be good news.
Yeah, and then you're showing that fines do work.
Yeah,
They do.
And NHTSA enforcement works. Right?
Hey, look at that.
Hey, if we're getting towards the end, I want to give you guys an interesting conversation stopper for your next cocktail party.
Good thing I've already stopped this recording.
Yeah, I've got a lot of those, so give me one that's better than all the ones I have.
All right, so I did a calculation and I discovered that an individual snowflake has roughly as many molecules of water in it as there are observable stars or stars in the observable universe. So we as human beings are kind of right in the middle between the smallest useful things and the biggest useful things. There you go. That'll stop any conversation.
That will.
This episode brought to you by Magic Mushrooms.
Thank you. Thanks,
With
everybody.
that, thanks, everybody. Have a good day, and we'll see you. Whatever. We'll be back next week.
Bye-bye.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.